Hello everyone, and welcome to Ku-ring-gai Council's Rainwater Tank Know-How webinar. This webinar is being brought to you by the Water Smart program that's being run by Council. So today I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Doric people, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which we are coming to you from, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So before we get started, I'd like to do some basic housekeeping. At the bottom of your screen, or at the top of your screen, depending on what version of Zoom you have, you should have a chat box. Please put any technical issues you have there in the chat. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them at appropriate times during the workshop or at the end when we have more time to have a general conversation about the things that David is going to be presenting. Also, if you have any issues and something very important you want to mention, you can raise your hand and we'll sort of see what we can do for you. So I'd like to introduce tonight's presenter. Our presenter tonight is David Knights. David is an environmental engineer with more than 20 years experience working in green infrastructure and sustainable water management. He has been running a sustainable water management workshops for residents and for more than 15 years, for council across Sydney. And I believe, David, you also work internationally as well. You work on projects around?
Yeah, correct. Less so since COVID times, but yeah.
Okay, cool. So anyway, over to you, David, and I'll let you take over the workshop and tell everyone about how to get started with the rainwater tanks.
Excellent. Thank you. I've just shared my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see it just fine.
Yep, perfect. Okay, great. So this presentation I've got tonight, particularly James, if you see the chat box has disappeared for me, but if you see and jump in with questions, happy to take questions as we go along, and particularly if you've got particular queries about anything that's shown as we go along. And it's really about it's in two parts, this presentation really. The first is about how you set up a rainwater tank scheme. What are the key considerations, the planning phase of it. And then the second phase goes into details, and the details phase, I'm happy to be guided by what people are interested in. So if you've got particularly interest in the detailed design phase, we can jump to that and talk to that, depending on how we're going for time. But yeah, the planning phase is probably the key components around just how to set up a rainwater tank. How much roof should you collect? What are the considerations in terms of water quality and considerations like that, and how you go about the consideration of all the plumbing around rainwater tanks. So change slide. So just a bit of a kind of background to why we harvest rainwater. There's a whole bunch of different drivers around rainwater reuse. There's rainwater tanks are really quick, simple, easy way. They're relatively straightforward technology. And they do a whole bunch of things that you can see on this. So they replace mains water use. They help reduce the amount of water that we take from river systems. So all the Hawkesbury and Nepean, got these big dams, which is like this one you see on the right. So the more that we can decrease our reliance on dams and desal, the more water that we can give back. Particularly during the noughties, the 2000s, drought proofing was a key consideration when we were on rainwater, when we were on potable water restrictions. It allowed you to irrigate, for example. And they also have a bunch of different benefits around improving water quality to local creeks. So they reduce the amount of stormwater runoff coming from your property, and they improve the water quality. Rainwater tanks are like little mini sediment basins where the sediment off your roof drops out in the tanks. And so the water quality coming out of tanks is better than what goes in. You can use rainwater for a range of different things, and probably one of the key things is that legally you're allowed to use rainwater for whatever you like. There's no restrictions on using rainwater for anything. So that's probably the first thing. New South Wales Health doesn't recommend it for drinking, and we'll go through the reasons for that, but it doesn't actually restrict it. It just says, generally their recommendation is not to use it for drinking. But within that, so besides drinking, you can actually use it for most of the water in your house, and we'll go through some of the considerations in terms of doing that. and why you might want to use it for different things in all these different things in your house. Most people obviously go straight to irrigation and outdoor use for rainwater tanks, but there's a lot of benefits in using it for what we call internal uses, so toilet flushing and clothes washing, for example. And so to explain why you want to consider using your rainwater tank for internal uses, it comes back to this pie chart. And what this is showing is this in the first number is the amount of litres per day on average for an average household. And this is a typical single dwelling. So if you live in an apartment, the numbers will be slightly different. You won't use so much for the garden, obviously. But internally, it's reasonably consistent between apartment and houses. And you see that, we use a lot of water for things like clothes washing, showers and baths, and toilet flushing. So if you only use it for external uses, you're only saving, up to 20% of your total water use. Whereas if you use it for clothes washing, hot water and toilets, you can substitute, more like 80% of the water use that you have in your house. So it saves a lot more water by plumbing it internally. And then you can see this. The other thing, if you've got a pool, the other thing to use it for is those houses with pools use a lot more water. So you can. This is a standard house with and without pools, and you can see the jump. So a house with a pool uses up to 100 kiloliters per year, and that's just because pools evaporate a lot. So the difference between pools and irrigation is actually a lot less. So this is a no pool and no watering in a household. This is a house with no pool but irrigation, and then this is houses with pools in it. So you can see that if you've got a pool is a good thing that you can potentially put a rainwater tank to use to top up the pool water use. And so the reason why it's good to plumb it into internal uses as well as external is obviously irrigation, for lawns and gardens, irrigating trees, etc. If you've got a veggie patch, all those things are great to reuse rainwater for. But the way rainwater tanks work is that if you connect it into more, you use a lot more, you save a lot more water with the same tank. And that's simply because, say, for example, in winter's a good way to think about it. In winter, when you're using the rainwater tank, there's not much irrigation. So, particularly over the last winter, it's been so wet. You wouldn't have needed to irrigate. Even now, most people are probably not irrigating that much, maybe every now and again. But at the moment, your rainwater tank would stay full. But if you use that for internal uses, you're drawing that tank down, you're saving water in the house, and then you're actually capturing more water in the tank again. So draining the tank is the best thing you can do for a rainwater tank. An empty tank is a good rainwater tank because it means you've used all the rainwater in the tank, you've saved that water, and you're ready to capture more. So having a tank that's empty is exactly what you want to do. And the way to do that is to draw down the tank quickly with using water internally in the house, because you use water regardless of the weather conditions. So, and I'll show you I've just got some simple little curves to show you how much more water you save on that. And we'll run through that in terms of the analysis of, how much extra water that saves, because it's quite a lot. And so when we look at rainwater harvesting, there's three key things that impact on the general setup of a tank. And I'm going to run through each of these three things. And each of these things are important in terms of the setup, because if you get any one of these kind of wrong, then the tank doesn't work particularly well. In some cases, it doesn't work very well at all, but in most cases it kind of just works, 50% as hard as it could. So the first is obviously the roof, how much roof you plumb it into, the tank size itself, and the rainwater usage, which is the question about what you plumb the rainwater tank into. So I'm going to run through each of these different topics. So I'm going to start with a collection area and the roof. So what's in rainwater? It's generally pretty clean. So that's the first thing. The first thing is that compared to grey water, wastewater, or stormwater. So grey water is like stuff that comes out of your bath or shower. Wastewater is stuff that comes out of your whole house, like your kitchen tap and your toilet. And stormwater is what comes off your paving or your driveway or things like that. So compared to all these other sources, rainwater is much, much cleaner, but it still does contain a range of different things. And I'm going to run through what it contains, because it affects what you use it for. So the first thing is it does contain heavy metals in very trace elements, but any metal can corrode. So all your roofs, for example, even if they're, a tile roof, you still have typically metal gutters, and zinc alum is often very common these days for roof sheeting. So all of these we find in rainwater tanks. And what we find though is that generally it's below the drinking water guidelines. So it's there, but it's not at a level that's of concern. The key one is lead. If you've got lead flashing on your roof, if you've got an older house, these days we don't use lead flashing, but if you've got an older house, you will have lead in your tank too. So that's important if you're thinking of using it for veggies and things like that. Obviously, you don't want to be, ingesting lead. Generally, for most other uses, it's fine, but like for clothes washing and things like that, irrigating the lawn, it's not an issue. But anything where you're ingesting the water, lead flashing is a risk. So it also contains pathogens, or things that causes gastrointestinal diseases, which is a fancy way of just saying diarrhea, effectively in most of these cases. So Giardia, most of you, if you were around during the late 1990s, early 2000s, the Giardia and Cryptosporidium. So we do find Giardia occasionally in rainwater tanks. So this was a study that was done in Adelaide, where if you've lived in Adelaide, the water tastes terrible. So a lot of people drink rainwater as a preference. I think 25% of houses literally have tanks just for drinking water. So they did a big study and they found that there is pathogens in there, and we almost always find pathogens in rainwater tanks. If I go and sample a tank, I'll generally almost find some pathogen in there. So they do contain pathogens, and that's why New South Wales Health recommends not drinking it, because it's not like your mains tap water, which is pretty much pathogen free unless something's really gone wrong. And it's kind of the reason why it's there is these critters at the bottom here. So the birds and the possums that particularly if you've got overhanging trees, birds that sit above it and they poo on your roof, and then those that fecal matter gets washed off from your roof and into your rainwater tank. And that's basically what it's coming from, is these, basically these critters in our urban environments that have access or up in the roof itself. They're basically what's contributing to it. And so what you find is, obviously if you've got no overhanging trees and you've got no possums and things like that, then you're basically going to have a lower risk of having pathogens in your tank. And for some areas, say for example, if you're in an apartment building, with no overhanging trees, you've probably got very low risk of actually having pathogens in them. But if you're a single dwelling household with big trees, you've probably got a higher risk. Interestingly, what has been found, this same study similar study in Adelaide, again, where they looked at rainwater tank, they did an epidemiological study, which is basically studying two groups of the community, one who used rainwater tanks for drinking water and one who didn't. And this study found that there was no difference in the rates of gastrointestinal diseases between the two groups. So somehow our bodies seem to adjust to this. So maybe we get sick once and then we build up an inbuilt resistance. And you kind of know that when you go traveling, like you see that when, in certain countries, where the water quality is not as good as in Australia, or even sometimes even like I find it often, even when I go to some places in Australia, like Darwin, I find it often I take a little while to adjust to the water in Darwin. So you kind of know this effect where you take some time to adjust to the local water, but the locals don't seem to get health issues, but you do coming into that community. So it's kind of the same thing. So somehow our body seems to adjust to having these pathogens in the water, but it is something that you need to be conscious of, particularly if you're immunocompromised or susceptible to gastrointestinal diseases in some way. What else is in your rainwater tank? And this is on a daily basis. This is more of a nuisance, particularly if you've got big overhanging trees, deciduous trees that drop a lot of leaves, or things that drop a lot of flowers, jacarandas. It's almost jacaranda season. Anything like that, you get a lot of from overhanging trees. You get a lot of leaf litter, which if it's left on your roof breaks down into fine, almost sludgy sediment, black kind of gunk. If you clean your roofs regularly, you'll know kind of what it breaks down to in the bottom of your gutters, and that washes off into your rainwater tank. And that does accumulate over time. You just get this sludge, and it's not particularly bad, but it does a few things. It can discolor your water, particularly if you have deciduous trees that drop a lot of leaves all at once and it all goes into your tank. It can slightly discolor your tank water. So I occasionally have this issue where I have a deciduous tree, drops a lot of leaves all at once. They all end up in my tank, and then, you know, during that period of typically about 2 to 3 weeks, my tank water goes slightly discolored, slightly browny. It's not particularly, it doesn't change anything, but it just, you know, if you're using it to flush your toilets, for example, it stains the toilet bowl. So it's a bit annoying. So generally what we recommend there is just, if you're going to use it internally for things like that, we generally recommend just a simple filter to take out that discoloration. We'll talk about that in terms of the details. So what can also be in rainwater is mosquitoes. So particularly if they don't have, this is an overflow, rainwater tank overflow, and you can see on here, this water comes out the top through here and actually flows out through this thing. And this should be connected to something, but this is the installation during the middle of it. It actually flows out through, and you can see that's a screened inlet, and you can see through here that's a screened inlet, and that's to stop mozzies getting into your tank and breeding in it, and, you know, creating, you know, rainwater tanks are good mozzie habitat. So you want to make sure that all the inlets and outlets are screened so that you don't get mozzies into there. And so, you know, particularly with the changing, you know, climate that we're having, like we're getting more and more, you know, what we consider tropical diseases coming down into Sydney. So we're starting to get things like Ross River fever in Western Sydney. So the more that we can control mosquito habitat, it's really good. Just again, general health thing to manage it overall. So that's kind of what we find in rainwater. They're all generally reasonably easy to manage or have good management ways, but it's just, you know, worthwhile being, you know, aware of what those things are, and then understanding your particular risk. You know, you'll know if you ever have overhanging trees and whether that's going to be a risk for you. Okay, so if we look at this idea of, okay, so we know what's in rainwater, how much rainwater do we get off roofs? And just to give you a simple little example of how quickly you can kind of get a feel for how much rainfall you get. And if you go online and type in rainwater tank calculator, often all the rainwater tank suppliers do this for you. So you can kind of just quickly type this into a rainwater tank on a website. And this is what the rainwater tank suppliers will do for you pretty quickly. But just put that in context. Most of the rainfall, so we have in Sydney on average, at the moment it feels like we get rain every single day, but on average over, you know, 20 years, we have 100 days of rainfall, and most of those rainfall days are less than 5 mils or less. So most of the rainfall, so 50 days or less, say for example, you get 5 mils or less. And 5 mils is the type of rainfall event that you don't really notice. It might rain for 5 minutes, or if it's an intense downpour, or half an hour if it's a pitter-patter type rainfall event, and then it disappears. And most of the day it could even be quite sunny. And so these are the events that rainwater tanks are really good at collecting, because they're frequent, because they're the ones that happen every 50 days, and they're the ones that you want to capture. Whereas the big rainfall events, when you get 100 mils, you can't capture all that in a rainwater tank. So we're really trying to capture the small frequent events. And to give you a feel for that, so if you have a 100 square meter roof, and given that most houses have about, say, 150, or if you're in a more recent home, probably more like 200 square meters for a typical single dwelling, a 5 mil rainfall event on 100 square meters of roof is 500. It's basically 5 times the 100, and that gives you the 5. And that, if you play around with the units, that's 500 liters, or half a kiloliter. And so if you think of most rainwater tanks, that gives you an idea, you know, of a rainwater tank of 5 kiloliters is a common rainwater tank size. A 5 mil rain event will fill up, you know, of that 5 kiloliter rainwater tank, it'll fill up about 10% of it. So that gives you a feel for these things are filling up, you know, quite a lot, like quite a small amount of a 5 kiloliter tank. And then a 10 mil rain event on a 50 square meter roof gives you the same amount. And so you can see that rainwater, the roof area matters. You know, double the roof area, you literally double the amount of rainwater that you're getting into your tank. So how much do you need to capture is a key consideration. And one of the key things to do is to actually work out where all your roof's area is draining to, because particularly if you live in a single dwelling, your roof will drain to a number of different downpipes. And so what we do is you can go to something like Google Maps. This is a simple Google Maps. And if you right click in Google Maps, it gives you an option to, at the very bottom, to measure a distance, I think it says. And when you trace around something and close that distance calculator, it'll actually give you an area. So you can trace around your roof in Google Maps and it'll tell you roughly the area. And so what you need to work out is, okay, if you've got, in this case, you've got this part of the roof, which is sloping all down to this gutter, it drains out to the front. This part of the roof all drains to the back, and all drains. There's a shed in this instance, they all drain, they combine together and drain to a downpipe here. So you can work out of your different downpipes, how much roof is draining to each of those downpipes, because it's not even. Typically what we find is, some downpipes might only have 20 square meters, like this one, 35 square meters, and another one might have 80 square meters. So you kind of need to work out what roof area is above each of the different downpipes. And you might need to collect 2 or 3 of those different downpipes to get enough roof area. This is another example, which is for a house in Canberra. This is my parents-in-law's house where they were putting in a rainwater tank. And this is one of the first steps that we do, is we go and just look at where all the downpipes are, look at the slopes of the roof, and then, get up on a ladder if need be and have a poke about and see which way it's draining. If you're not sure, sometimes you're not sure exactly which parts of the roof drain where. What we do is we just put a hose into the gutter and just see which way it flows. You can just see, okay, yep, that's all draining down to that. And then at this point here, it drains the other way. And then you can work out through the ridge lines on the roof which areas are draining which way. And then you can see here, in this case, this roof is quite complex. They've got, a shed out the back, a garage out the back. We got a back of the house, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different downpipes, all with different areas. So you want to know, should I catch all those downpipes, or do I need, just 1 and 2? Is that enough? And then obviously, if I'm putting my rainwater tank out the back, I don't really want to capture 4 and 5, because then I'd have to have a pipe that goes all the way back from the front of the house all the way around to the back, which I'd prefer to avoid if I can. So it comes to a point logistically where even though you might go, oh yeah, why don't I just capture all the roof? Logistically, it might not actually be that beneficial to capture all that roof, just because the plumbing, it may not, it may be difficult to get water all the way around to the side of the house. So understanding which roof areas drain to which downpipes and what those areas are is kind of the first step that we do. And then obviously you'll know, or you can easily work out where all your downpipes are in your house. And so if you've got a really simple house that just has, 2 or 3 downpipes, great, it's pretty easy. But yeah, depending on the complexity of the roof, you can see here, this house has probably 1 at the front, 1 at the back on both sides. And then it has, probably again, on this side, it has downpipes on both sides. So this house might have 6, possibly, 8 downpipes for this. So you want to work out which ones of those have got the different roof areas. This is my house. I live in the inner west. I live in Marrickville, so this is kind of like a classic kind of smaller scale. Where over the extensions, but extensions was done before I moved into the house. This is extension at the back, and when they did the extension, they actually plumbed. This house has got a ridge line through the center. It's like classic A-frame kind of roof setup. All this drains to this side. This all drained to the back of the house. So it all drained through here. And then when they did the extension, they took this water all the way around the house, and then they drained it back out the front, and then drained it all to the front through here. And you can see that's what this is. This is the plumbing coming all the way back, and then it goes all the way back out to the front. But what that meant was, just by luck, all of my roof drained to this one point. Literally, like 140 square meters of the roof drained to this one point. So as soon as you know that, that's obviously the ideal point to put the rainwater tank, because then I can just literally drop the water down into here, which is what we've done, and then put the rainwater tank here, which is what we have. And then that literally don't really need much plumbing except a rainwater downpipe straight into the tank. And so,
David,
yep.
We have a question from Kat.
Yeah, great.
It's regarding the mapping out or measuring of the roof. She says that what if you cannot see the roof on Google Maps because of all the trees? Any suggestions on how to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good question. So yeah, if you've got a difficult roof, then you might have to go back to the old tape measurement. You might actually have to go and measure the sides of your house and where the ridge lines are and measure it that way. That's probably the only way to do it. The other way that you could potentially do it is there's a historical map viewer. If you type in New South Wales DPI historical map viewer, you can go back and pull up a 1970s aerial. And if your house was built, say, back in the 1970s, maybe you won't have big trees overhanging the roof. But that's a bit more cumbersome. Maybe the best way is just to get the tape measure out and measure things on site.
Or perhaps if you've purchased a house recently, going on to Domain or realestate.com and seeing the old floor plans and maybe estimating it from that, perhaps.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, if you've got architecture plans, or floor plans from when you bought the house, absolutely. Yeah, that's really good too. It may not tell you exactly where the ridge lines are, but it'll give you a first cut at the distances. Yep. Okay, great. So that's, measuring the roof. Yeah, and you can see here, as James was pointing out, that's exactly kind of what I've marked up on here. Like this is kind of the thing that we got with the, when we bought the house, the classic real estate map. So that's what we've, just used to make up this drawing. So the next step is to work out what to plumb it into. And again, I've just picked up this, my parents-in-law's house in Canberra. So what we then do on mark on top of this roof area, so you worked out where the roof area is and where the different things are. We then kind of work out where the things are in the house. So the H is where the hot water system is. The L is where the laundry is, the clothes washing machine, and the B is where the bathroom is. They actually have 2 bathrooms, but this is their main bathroom, the one that gets used all the time. So we pick out the main ones. If you've got a bathroom that only gets used once, by guests, it may not be worth plumbing it into that. If it's easy, great, do it. But, just plumb it into the main bathrooms that gets used. And then they have a bit of a native bush garden out the front, which they don't irrigate very much, but then they irrigate the lawn and stuff out the back. So what you can see straight away is that all their uses are out the back of the house and their irrigation is out the back of the house. So that kind of suggests, generally speaking, somewhere at the back of this house is where the tank would want to go. And then you can see that this is where the plumbing is easy to do. In this case, they actually have, this is like a guest room out the front, and they actually have a toilet at the front here, but you can kind of see this is the guest room. It's not used that much. So plumbing it back to that is a bit harder. So it doesn't get used that much. So it's not really worth plumbing it back to that particular toilet. But here they've got 3 good things that they can all plumb it back to, all pretty close together. And when they actually installed their rainwater tank, they actually installed it off the shed and they put it here. That's just pretty much, they decided that's where they wanted the tank more than anything else. And then we had a connection over from this roof downpipe on this side and connected that into it too. So we captured one and the shed and put it into the rainwater tank and then plumbed it back into the irrigation and the hot water in their instance. Yep. So next slide. So this is, again, just going back to my house, and again, same thing. So my house has the laundry, the bathroom, and the hot water. The laundry's, for us, we just have a combined, bathroom and laundry. The laundry is sitting in effectively like a little cupboard inside the bathroom, and the hot water is literally right underneath it, sitting outside. So again, we just plumbed it into those 3 things, as well as, we use it for irrigation as well. So it has the external tap outside, sits next to the hot water system. So again, very simple plumbing. We just plumbed it back to those 3 uses because they're all located close together. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through kind of like the different uses in a house. This is kind of like typically what you use. You can look at that later, but that's kind of just roughly what you use in a house in terms of liters per day. And you can see, for a typical usage, the bath and shower is, particularly if you have, 5-minute shower, 10 litre per minute shower head, that's kind of like, 50 litres per day. And, if you've got a dual flush toilet, you might only flush that depending on whether, you're at home all the time or not. You might only be flushing the toilet, 3-4 times a day if you're not at home or in the house all the time. So you can see straight away that, plumbing it into the bath and shower, that's a big daily use. And that's why, you consider plumbing it into those uses. To calculate seasonal garden use, if you have a garden, you can quickly calculate seasonal garden use, particularly if you've got a record of your old water bills. And again, this was done, this is something again that we did calculated for my parents-in-law's water use. And they had their water bills all the way back from 2007 up to 2010. So they just plotted that in Excel. And you can see basically in winter, particularly in Canberra, if you know Canberra weather, it's, frosty, cold, not much going on. And so you can see that, you pretty much never irrigate in winter in Canberra. And so you can sit there and go, okay, well, everything below this green dashed line is internal use. And then you can see it jumps up in summer. And if it's a hot summer, like it was in 2009, you can see their water use doubles from, typically 9 kiloliters per quarter up to 18 kiloliters per quarter. And what you can do is you can subtract all these numbers from your baseline. So this is your baseline internal use, and then the difference between all of that. So 11, minus 9 gives you or whatever that is, 11 minus 8, sorry, that's 3 kiloliters. Then add the 10 kiloliters, do the subtraction in Excel, and that tells you how much of your water use is going to be seasonal use. And so you can work out how much you use for irrigation. And depending on your particular, garden size, types of plants, lawn, etc., everyone uses different amounts. That's probably one of the biggest variables, and as well as obviously the pool. So if you've got a pool, this will be even more exaggerated. You'll use a lot more water in pool. This could go up to, maybe 25 or 30 kiloliters per quarter in summer. And then I'll typically, well, I'll skip over this because this is kind of like how you can do it manually as well. You can work out how long you put the hose and things on for and how often you water, but generally recommend using water builds if you can. Same thing, you can calculate it manually if you want, but generally we just recommend using the typical percentages. It's close enough, but you can calculate it out, if you know how many clothes washes you do. But again, generally we recommend using the percentages to work that out. And I'll show you how that works in a little rainwater tank calculator. Okay, so this is Tankulator, and I've just jumped online. This website is still online, but it's actually it's got an issue at the moment where it's actually not calculating properly. The postcode is not pulling up the rainfall data. So I've just sent them a little email just to see if they are going to fix it, because this is a great little tool. But unfortunately, it's actually the tool is still there, but it's not working. But I'm going to run you through this analysis because it shows you for, we've pulled in Taramara 2075. And we've put in a little scenario where we say, okay, this is a typical house using 300 liters per day. And these are the percentages. So in Tankulator, you can add, I use 15% for my toilet, 27% for the bathroom, 22% for the laundry, etc. And they're straight from the percentages on that pie chart that I had. You put in the roof area. So we that's from your calculations. Or if you don't know, you could just at least, just straight away just put in 100, just as a default. You can ignore this first flush. It doesn't matter, or you can put it in, but for the moment we can just ignore it. It's not a big factor. We're not going to use a second catchment. You can put in an email address. You can just put in whatever. And then what it spits out when it's working is this. So it allows you to it shows you the blue here, shows you how much your water tank your tank levels vary. So the tank here is full, and here it's empty. And then it shows you how often it's empty. And then you can change the tank size, and then you can change what you plumb it into. So you can plumb it into your toilet, bathroom, kitchen, laundry, garden, or you can put those on mains. So you can choose quickly, and then it'll update this calculation. And then it tells you how much water you save. So it says, okay, if you put it into all these different things and have a 10 kiloliter tank, you're going to save 84 kiloliters of water per year. And it's pretty good. This little tank calculator was funded by Department of Sustainability in Vic at the time. So it was, quite a good little tool. So I'm hoping that they fix it and get it up and running again. So what I've done is I've just asked a number of questions of Tankulator, literally just straight out of Tankulator, just to say, okay, how should I set up my rainwater tank? And I've asked, there's 3 questions that I want to ask it. And they're related to the 3 key factors. I want to ask, how big should my tank be? How much roof area should I capture? And what should I plumb it into? And so the first question I asked, I kept the roof area and the tank size the same. So I had 100 square meters of roof, I think, and then I had a 5 kiloliter tank, and I plumbed it to these different choices. I plumbed it to the garden only, so irrigation, the garden and the toilet, and then the garden, toilet and laundry, and the garden, toilet, laundry and hot water. And you can see here that it's pretty much, doubling, going up by 20 kiloliters each time. So it's gone from 20 to 80 kiloliters just by adding. So the same tank, the same roof area, I'm saving almost 4 times as much water if I plumb it into different things. And this is just showing it in a bar chart. So the garden and toilet, the garden, toilet and laundry, garden, toilet, laundry and hot water. So same tank size. I haven't spent any more except a little bit of extra plumbing, but you can see straight away, if I just plumb it into garden, I'm not maximizing my rainwater tank. I could get a lot more rainwater reuse and all the other benefits that you get from it, in terms of saving potable water, mains potable water, saving the amount of stormwater runoff into the creeks and improved water quality, all by plumbing it into more. And so that's why we generally recommend consider plumbing it into as many of the internal devices, as is feasible and you feel kind of comfortable with in terms of a water quality perspective. So the second question we then ask is, okay, so great, I know generally I should plumb it into more things, that saves a lot more water. And then we ask it, okay, what if I plumb it into different tank sizes? How big should it be? And I'll show this. This is easy to read in a chart more than just the numbers, but I plumbed it into a 0.5 kiloliter, 1 kiloliter, 2 kiloliter, 5 kiloliter, and a 10 kiloliter tank. And what this is showing is that actually a big tank, and what I kept the gardens, toilet and laundry the same now, because I only want to look at the impact of the tank size. I held the roof area and what I plumbed it into constant. And so what this is showing is that for most houses, in most scenarios, you don't need much more than a 5 kiloliter tank. Depending slightly, the only time we would recommend going much bigger than a 5 kiloliter tank is if you've got a really big irrigation demand. So if you've got a big irrigation demand, you will get a benefit in going up to a big tank. But if you just have a standard irrigation, which means, some irrigation for your lawn, some irrigation for the garden, but it's not excessive, it's not a big area of lawn, it's not in full sun, even 2 kiloliters is a pretty good rainwater tank for that scenario. So the key message that and this is often what people kind of get caught up on, because it's kind of what the rainwater tank suppliers supply with. They can encourage you to put in a big tank, but actually a better system is a small rainwater tank, a 2 kiloliter tank plumbed into toilets and laundry and hot water will save more money in terms of, and save more water than just plumbing a 10 kiloliter tank into garden use. And that's just literally because the 2 kiloliter tank is emptying and filling all the time. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think, well, 10 kiloliter tank is going to save more water, but a 2 kiloliter tank plumbed into lots of uses actually saves you a lot more water. And so our general rule is, typically for most houses, we find 2 to 5 kiloliters is the right range. And so my tank, for example, we've plumbed in a 4 kiloliter rainwater tank, and we plumb ours into hot water, laundry, and the toilets and irrigation. And we save, we've installed it 10 years ago, and we basically use 80% rainwater and 20% mains water. So most of my water, 80% of it is coming from the rainwater tank, even with just a 4 kiloliter tank. So the final question you can ask Tankulator is how much roof should I plumb into the rainwater tank. So now I've held that 5 kiloliter tank constant again, and I'm plumbing it into garden, toilets and laundry again. And then you can see here that what happens is once you get above 100 square meters of roof, you don't save a lot more water. And that's good to know. So again, that same chart, that's really good to know, because if I only need to capture 100 square meters, I don't need to maybe get the front of the house or the other side of the house. And I'm just going to pause there because I know there's a chat box. James, have you read that? If you've read that, do you want to? And you're on mute, James.
Yes, I'm always forgetting that. What if you run out of rainwater for your internal stuff?
Yeah, great question.
Laundry and toilet, you can't flush the toilet anymore?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, you have to use your neighbor's toilet. No, that's a really good question. So what you have is what's called an automatic switching device. And so what these are is they're little kind of the smarts of your pump on a tank, and we'll go into this in the details. I'll show you what they look like. They're literally just a little pump controller, and what it does is it senses when your tank's empty, and it turns your pump off effectively, and then it just automatically switches to mains water. So my house has one of these, and I don't really know. Actually, what I do notice on my house is a slight change in pressure in my water system, but it literally does it. It just seamlessly changes. So even if I'm having a shower and I run out of rainwater, the pump switches off, and then it just has a little turnover. It takes about 5 seconds, and then the mains water comes through. So it's kind of like a little stutter in my shower. It literally does happen to me sometimes. I'm in the shower and it just changes over and it sputters for about 5 seconds, and then the mains water kicks in.
Okay. Also, thanks, David. We have I think Bo Pang has raised her hand. Maybe Bo, if you have a question, could you please put that in the Q&A box, and we'll get to it when we can. Yep.
Thanks, James.
David. Sorry, David, you're on mute.
Thanks. So I have a little cheat sheet for how I do my rainwater tanks if I'm just giving, general advice. Like I generally say, try and capture at least 100 square meters of your roof. You don't need to capture much more. And then try and put in at least 2 up to about 5 kiloliters, but don't go too much more than that unless you have lots of irrigation or a pool. And then if you've got lots of irrigation or a pool, maybe consider 10 kiloliters if you can, but don't at least put in 5. And then try and plumb it into as many uses as you can. And I generally recommend, again, this depends a little bit on your own risk profile in terms of, how comfortable you feel using rainwater. But, I recommend plumbing it into at least toilets and clothes washing machine and hot water if you feel comfortable with that. And generally, we don't recommend plumbing it into your drinking water like New South Wales Health. In my household, for example, I just have 2 taps that are totally on mains water. And that's what we use for our, the kitchen and the bathroom tap effectively. Okay, so that's kind of helps you set up, the general rules for setting up a rainwater tank and what you should be thinking about in terms of just general planning for the rainwater tank. And now I'm going to go into some of the details around, how you actually choose the tank itself and the plumbing, the pumps, the automatic switching device that I talked about. And I might just pause there, James. I've seen others popped up in the chat box. I can grab it. Oh no, that's you, James. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Cool. Thanks. So tanks. So there's a number of different types of tanks. So there's steel. The steel tends to be a little bit more expensive. They're coated inside with like a food grade lining, which protects it. As I said, otherwise it would corrode. So they have a food grade lining internally. And then there's plastic tanks, and they similarly have a lining inside. Generally, steel tends to be more just because of the price of steel. And generally you find round tanks tend to be cheaper than all the others. And that's just because they're the most efficient in terms of materials. But they're the most hardest to fit on sites generally because they're, compared to a slimline tank, they kind of stick out a bit, but they're the simplest, classic. If you go to, you have a farm stay or if you have a farm property, you'll know, most often you'll see these old Gal steel tanks, on most rural properties. Slimline tanks are really good because you can fit them down the side of properties. I used a slimline tank literally just because it was the only thing that really fit in my property. So this is 2 kiloliter slimline tanks piggybacked together. So this is a 4 kiloliter system with combined together, and they're just interconnected. So you can piggyback slimline tanks. These days, I think when these were put in the very beginnings, you could only get 2 kiloliter slimlines, and they have little holes in them, and that's because otherwise they bow out just structurally. They don't have the strength. But then they kind of worked out a way to get bigger slimline tanks. But typically slimline tanks go up to about 4 or 5 kiloliters before you just need to get more than that. You need to piggyback them together. When I mean that, you just literally join them together. So they operate as one tank, but they're 2 tanks connected together. And these days we find a lot of people quite like slimline tanks because they fit, in your garden, they optimize the space within the garden. Even if you've got a lot of space, you can kind of tuck them away somewhere.
We have a question from Howie, about plumbing in. What does that mean?
Oh,
And
yep.
is that a serious amount of work
Yep.
for a
Good question.
plumber? Is it
Yep.
expensive?
Yeah, exactly. So depends on your house. So if you've got a house that has a cavity underneath it, so it's raised up on piers or whatever, it's pretty easy. Like the plumber basically just, and my house is exactly this. Plumber basically works under the house, runs pipe, the water mains underneath the house. If you've got a 2-story house, and you've got complex plumbing internally, with toilets, upstairs, for example, in locations that are difficult to access, then yeah, it can get quite difficult because you're running plumbing all the way around the house. So it depends a lot on the setup of the house. But generally, most people have, your laundry, toilet, and often your hot water co-located together, and you kind of pick off those things. And so plumbing in literally means what you need to do is you need to run the mains water. So this is the plumbing here. So this is, everyone has these pipes. You'll often see them, from your water meter. And sometimes, in my house, for example, they run down the side of my house. That plumbing, you need to run this separate line of plumbing from your rainwater tank effectively back into your new connections. So because you have your mains water, but then you have your rainwater connected to it as well. And so you need to redo that plumbing effectively. And that's what I refer to when I'm saying plumbing in. And so typically that might cost, between a simple cost might be about $500 for a plumber to do that. Whereas if it's more complicated and they have to punch multiple connections through your house. So typically what they do is they drill, they might come in and take it, might be underground up to a certain point, then run up the wall and drill it into where your bathroom or your laundry is. If you've got lots of complex connections, the amount of points where they have to penetrate through the house into the house back again, that might mean, $1,000. And so, yeah, so if you put that in the context of the cost, yeah, it might cost the same as like a 2 kiloliter rainwater tank. So you might spend $1,000 on plumbing and $1,000 for the tank, to give you some perspective of it.
And in
So,
terms of footings, concrete footings underneath
yep.
to support the weight.
Yeah, exactly. So generally for tanks, it's recommended to put it on something flat and level. So if you've got nice flat ground, hard ground that's not going anywhere, say for example, you've got shallow bedrock, and you can put it on, an area of shallow bedrock, and it might just need some compacted gravel underneath anything. And so as long as it doesn't move, but if you've got soft, squishy ground that you're going to put on, that kind of moves when it rains and is really soft underfoot, then yeah, we generally recommend putting the tank on a level base, because if your tank is on an angle, it's not great. You can't access the bit that kind of in the low point of the tank. So you want your tank to be relatively level in terms of the setup. I'll talk about a good way to set up a tank in terms of the way that we recommend setting it up. Most tank suppliers will tell you to set it up level. We actually recommend putting it on a slight grade to allow you for maintenance, to allow you to de-sludge it. So I'll talk a little bit about that. It doesn't need to be dead level, but it needs to be within about, say, 1 in 100, 1 in 50. So 1 to 2% fall across it. Yep. Yep, just another example of slimline tank. They tend to be more expensive, not too much more expensive these days. And if you go onto to rainwater tank websites, that they're doing, most of them these days have prices that you can see online straight away. You can compare across the different suppliers. So generally we generally recommend that, unless price is a real driver for you, we generally find, choosing the right rainwater tank shape and size that fits in with your garden tends to be the way that most people seem to go. You can put it under your house. So a good example of that is a bladder tank, or this product name here is called an eco sack. We generally don't, this is a really space efficient way of doing it. So we've seen a couple of these installed in, terraces in new towns and things like that, where they really don't have much space. We generally don't recommend it, because if something goes wrong, you can imagine trying to crawl underneath here and fix stuff. You can even imagine the plumbing, you want to change stuff, the pump goes or whatever. It's a bit annoying to do all your maintenance kind of on your hands and knees, or even to replace the pump. So if you can avoid this, it's great. If you've got a deck space and the deck has quite a, as a reasonable clearance, it might work pretty well for you to do something under the deck or under the house. But this type of setup where it literally is, not much clearance, we generally don't recommend it unless you can avoid it. You can do in-ground tanks. Generally, we don't recommend in-ground tanks unless, again, you're really doing a new build. Like some of these cases, it's a new build. We certainly don't recommend it where you're in bedrock. So many of you will be on, you'll have bedrock. You're on a bush block. The bedrock's literally at the surface because just the cost of excavation to put the tank in underground. The main reason, again, you do it is just for space saving. So it is a really good space saver because you can come and bury the whole tank again. But it's higher risk because water, if something leaks in here, it's harder to fix. And then, you can get ingress through the lids of stormwater into the tank. So it's a higher risk scenario as well, only slightly. But for most people, they won't really be considering an in-ground tank, but it is an option. It's an option, particularly where, like, if you're doing significant landscaping and you're doing terracing, you might want to consider, say, like even partially burying the tank or something like that. That may be an option for you if you're doing significant landscaping in a renovation or something. And then generally, if you're doing an in-ground tank, I would definitely consider something that's really sturdy. Like personally, I'd probably go to something like a concrete tank if it's underground, just because I want that peace of mind that it's going to last for 50 years. Even though, these days you can get, strong plastic materials. I tend to be a bit more conservative, maybe the engineer in me. But yeah, I'd definitely consider, something that has got really good structural stability. Yep, we talked about this. It's got slightly different Sydney water requirements compared to, because of that higher risk. So it needs a testable backflow prevention device, which means you actually have to add a piece of plumbing equipment just before your meter, which stops the potential for your rainwater tank to go back into your neighbour's house, and that's a plumbing requirement. You can get, I've talked about slimline tanks. Slimline tanks are often about 800 mils wide, typically a meter wide, depending on what tank you get. But there are these really ultra thin tanks, so you can put them, really right up against, like a passageway or something like that. Again, these tend to be more expensive again, because you're paying for more material for the same amount of space and the additional strengthening that are required, because these tanks have the potential to bow out in the middle. So they need to have more strengthening, through the ribs of it, which is why I kind of got this tessellated pattern on this rainwater tank. That's actually there for structural reasons. But they are really great, particularly you've got, townhouse, anything like that, you've got really tight for space. They are perfect for that. Let's go quickly talk about bushfire tank setup. For those, who definitely in bushfire zones, rainwater tank setup for bushfire is really different. So it's worthwhile just quickly talking to that. So the first thing is you want a bigger tank. So, instead of having a 5 kiloliter tank plumbed into everything, you actually want a large tank, 20 kiloliters, typically, at least 10 kiloliters, depending on, where you are and what your risk is. And you typically need depending on what the setup of it is, but you generally have these with a high head and high flow rate pump. And that's to, get the water out of the tank really quickly, because in that scenario where you're keeping things, literally, trying to put out something that's either you've got two choices kind of in the middle of firefighting, like trying to put out a flame, you really want water coming out at that time. But also if you just want to keep, ember attack, you want to keep things just, you're away from the house, you're constantly spraying things back onto the roof, for example. And so in these scenarios, when you've got these high flow rate pumps and you've got high head pumps to spray it out into the sprinklers, for example, lots of more sprinklers going at once, it drains the tank pretty quickly. And that's why you need that bigger tank. And that doesn't mean you lose all the water. If it's going onto the roof, it just recirculates back into the tank and it will go. You will lose water through evaporation over time. And depending on, how much it's spraying off the roof as well. But yeah, you've got this setup where larger tanks, larger flow rate to keep it going. And so the classic setup is you can have like a dedicated, so if you're doing this, you can have, like in this scenario, you can have like a dedicated rainwater tank for your firefighting. And then you might have one of these tanks is set up for an internal use, where that can be a smaller tank that's got a smaller pump that supplies your water conservation, rainwater reuse tank. You can set up that you then also have it one tank with storage at the bottom, so you can have this reservoir that the main tank has a higher offtake. And so this pump supplies your house, and then you always keep, say, 10 kiloliters. So you could have like a 15, 20 kiloliter tank, but always keep 10 kiloliters in it. And this is your firefighting pump. And then this is your mains water pump. So you always keep water in the bottom of your tank. So you can do it that way too. There's both the scenarios work. A dedicated tank or a dedicated storage both work really well. There's no difference between it. And then for this pump in particular, this one is normally mains connected, mains power, off your electrical supply. This one you want to consider like particularly because there's high potential for an outage in the power supply. During these, particularly the really severe bushfire conditions that can occur. Petrol-driven pump is definitely worth considering to give you that, extra security for being able to run this during all scenarios. And then typically, you want to attach this that has a connection that has a simple firefighting hose as well. It's like not a standard hose. You have a firefighting hose connection to this pump, so that, either yourself, you're protecting your house in a particular bushfire, or, fire service can come in and connect into that and can connect a firefighting hose to it. So it's got different connections to it for firefighting.
Yes, and on that note, the name of the connections are called Storts fittings. So if you are concerned about a bushfire, you want to have a rainwater tank that can be used for firefighting, have it installed with Storts fitting, and then you should be able to have that set up for yourself. Yeah. I think and Storts fittings come in 25 mil, 38 and 65 mil. I believe you might be looking at a 38 mil Storts fitting, because I don't think they can draw water through a 25 fitting. But if in doubt, just send me a question and I can sort of confirm that with the local RFS brigades. Cool. Yeah, that's me.
Yep. And yeah, if you've got questions around the setup for firefighting, we chuck that in. Any questions about that, we can talk about that too. Questions. So let's go talk about the plumbing just quickly. I'm just going to run through this really quickly, and if you've got questions about any of this, happy to just chat afterwards if you've got questions. But yeah, gutter guards really great, particularly overhanging leaves. These systems, this gutter guard is a really good setup where it's got it just runs off. You don't want anywhere it can leaves can collect in there, so you want this smooth surface to run off. So generally they're not no maintenance, but they definitely decrease the maintenance. So gutter guards are good. Don't recommend these types of gutter guards. They're not big enough. So, the amount of leaves that get pushed onto this, and then they block, and then the water actually starts getting diverted, starts running off and splashing everywhere. So I don't recommend these ones. We generally, if you recommend a first flush device, which just helps keep some of the sediment out of your tank. It won't keep all of it out, but it's a simple little, this is the first flush diverter here. And then, so what happens is water comes down here first. There's a little cap at the bottom with a little weep hole. During the rain event, this first liter of water fills up before it goes into your tank. And the idea is that, some of the sludge gets caught in that, and then you have to empty that out occasionally. This is another setup. This is my parents-in-law's place I was telling you about. This is the tank that they've installed. This is their irrigation, tap. And then this is their first flush diverter, and they've just connected it into the garden. So it just weeps into the garden. And simple little thing, simple little plastic. The plumber typically does that. So you need a pump if for anything other than hand watering. So even if you're running sprinkler systems, you'll need a pump to get the pressure. You need a pump if you're going to supply stuff internally. We recommend a brand name, Davy, Grundfos, classic ones. There are others as well, but yeah, typically go for a brand name. Your plumber, if you do it with the plumber will know for sure what the brand names are. Grundfos, Davy are both really, established names. I'd recommend, definitely recommend one of those. I've had a Davy pump in now for whatever it is, 12 years, 13 years. It hasn't broken down on me once. You can certainly get a lot cheaper pumps, but that old phrase of buy cheap, buy 3 times type thing. You'll definitely find that with pumps. The quality
what capacity and what kind of power
Yeah, exactly. So they're generally low power. So they're generally single phase, and they typically run, like mine's about 750 watts. So I'll just show you some curves. So typically, depending on what you plumb it into, they'll typically about 500 watts power draw. And then bigger pumps go almost up to almost 1,000 watts or a kilowatt. So I've done some monitoring. I've done some energy monitoring of my pump, and Sydney Water supplies water to you at about 0.2 kilowatt hours per kiloliter. Technically, that's kind of what they supply from. And my pump supplies my water to my house at about 750 watts per kiloliter. So it is more energy intensive than what Sydney Water supplied at, and that's just because they've got scale. So I'll show you a little bit about how a pump curve and sizing for that. But you generally want to put a housing around this for noise, and generally try and locate this away from windows. It sounds like a fridge. It kind of sounds like a fridge when you're turning it on. You know, when a fridge kicks in, you kind of hear that low humming, and during the day you don't hear it, but at night you do. And then, yeah, you can do a submersible. Generally, we don't recommend a submersible because it's harder to maintain. So if submersible means literally sitting in the tank, so it sits in the tank, but generally this is an external setup. This is the drawer off the tank. This is just a little Y filter here. So it just strains out any material, protects the pump. That's just literally a tap. Can close it if I need to do any maintenance or clean this filter. And I've got a water meter. That's just a standard water meter onto my tank. And then this is the automatic switching device. The Rainbank is the product name for that. So that's the thing that switches over from when my rainwater tank's empty. And it just...
Sorry, we have a question from Kat. For normal purposes, what would you recommend, metal or plastic rainwater tank?
Yeah, my tank is plastic, and I just went for that because my personal preference was I think, you know, I've seen a lot of metal tanks corrode over time. I think the plastic is going to last longer. But, you know, it comes down to, I think either are fine. I think a lot of people like the structure and solidity and the look of a metal tank. So a lot of people prefer it. If you're in a bushfire situation where you're in a high category bushfire, definitely steel is better because the plastic one will melt and warp. So if you're in a bushfire hazard, definitely steel is the way to go.
And on that note, most of Ku-ring-gai is subject to ember attack.
Exactly.
So even if you aren't close to bushland, if you think that your property is going to be vulnerable to ember attack, and your bushland and your landscaping might catch fire, or your neighbours, you might want to think of metal.
Yep.
Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be posting this recording online on YouTube. So that's one way. David, we do have a question about slides. Are you happy to share the slides with the participants?
Yeah, of course. Yep, great. So I'll just race through. I'm just conscious of time, so I understand if people need to drop off, but I've got like half a dozen slides or so left. So this is the automatic switching device, just another photo of it. It's the same product name, Rainbank. These go with the Davy pump. So Davy and Rainbank go together. And you can again see it's just literally, what it's got here is a level sensor that goes into the tank. And that's what tells when the water runs empty, that just literally tells this to stop the pump. And then it's got an automatic switching device, which is literally like it's a dual check valve. And all it does is just says, okay, there's no pressure from the pump. The mains water then runs through this system and into your household supply. So literally just automatically switches over. There's other ones around. Onga pumps have one, and there's others around as well. We recommend one, if in my rainwater tank setup, the one thing I would have done differently to what I have done and set up is I would have installed a pressure tank. So people were talking about energy use and how to minimize energy use. There's been some good studies now showing that a pressure tank saves energy. So it can cut the use of energy by about 50%. And what they are is literally just this steel pressure vessel with a diaphragm in it. And what the pump does, instead of supplying it directly to your house, it supplies this pressure vessel and it pumps this up. And this one is about 50 liters. They tend to be about 50 liters, 80 liters. So they're, about yay high and yay wide. So they're not very big. And what it means is this can fill up. And then if you flush your toilet and your toilet only uses about 5 liters of water, say, instead of the pump turning on, this can hold pressure in the whole system, and it just pushes water out to your tank, to your house, to flush the toilet without necessarily the pump having to turn on. So instead of the pump having to turn on, for every toilet flush, it now only needs to turn on for every 5 toilet flushes. So it's much more efficient. The pumps don't like turning on and off all the time. So it preserves your pump, it makes it last longer, and it saves your energy use because the pump's running more efficiently. So I've toyed with the idea of retrofitting this back into my pump system, but I haven't done it yet. But if I had done my system again, I would have put this in from the start. I talked about a filter. So they call this I think it's a Big Blue or Blue Boy or something cartridge filter. I can't remember the exact name, but it's you can see, if you Google it, you'll find it. And they're literally just like a little activated carbon. You can change the media over. And what happens is on the way to when it goes out, the pump goes, so this is the pump here underneath the pump housing. And then it goes into the cartridge filter. And in this case is going into this hot water system. And what it does is it just filters out I never get sediment in my rainwater. You generally don't get sediment, but what I get is that coloration. And what it does, it just knocks out that color. And so you never get coloration in it. So it's been really good. I retrofitted a cartridge filter into my system because I was getting that color. So just to knock that color out. And it's great. And then it requires a little bit of maintenance. Every couple of years, I unscrew this system and then change the media over. Kind of like if you have a water filter, a Brita water filter or any of those types of things. It's the same. It's exactly the same system as one of those systems. Some people have it installed underneath their sink on potable water. Same idea. Plumbing. And so this gives you, somebody asked about the plumbing and the diagram of the plumbing. So this is literally what it is. So you have the down pipes going in to your tank. And generally you might, as I said, you might collect 2 or 3 down pipes into it. And then water comes in. So that's how water gets into your tank. You have an overflow and you have a first flush diverter. And then from the tank, you have a connection into the pump. And then plumbing, you're plumbing it in. So I talk about plumbing it in, and it goes back to all the devices that you're plumbing it into. So it literally has, that 20 mil copper pipe running back into each of the different devices that you plumb it into. And then there's some technical requirements around plumbing. And so this is typically what your plumber will look at. And so this is just a little cheat sheet of all the different things that you kind of consider when you're doing it. And so there's a couple of key things that is worth just checking and making sure, like you need at least 100 mils between your gutters, the bottom of the gutter and the tank. And that's just to make sure that it doesn't back up and cause damage to your roofing system, and your gutters can drain if this ever gets full and can't overflow. And then you need 100 mil outlet overflow. So there's some just little cheat sheets, and everything else is, again, your plumber will do this. Is a detailed diagram, but this is kind of the key things. And then the other thing is, you typically set your offtake off the bottom, and that's so that your sludge can accumulate over time. So you don't set this right at the bottom. Again, most tanks are set up this way anyway, so it's not something you have to think about, but this is just a little cheat sheet for the things that we think about for plumbing for the tank. You can surcharge it. So sometimes, surcharging, and I'll show you exactly what surcharging is, but surcharging is really useful if you want to get, say for example, you want your tank separated. You want to put it away from your house, and you can't just connect the pipes, the down pipes to your tank. And what you do is surcharging is you literally put the tank underground, and then the pipe comes back up again. So I'll show you a section of what that looks like. So what that means is you got the down pipe, it goes down typically underground. So this is like, you might take it across the garden, and then it comes back up and into the tank. And this idea of water going down, then back up again, that's surcharging. And so that works fine. Generally, we recommend having a little scour pipe at the bottom so that you can empty this, because water sits in here. If you can avoid this, it's great to avoid it. But if you can't, if you need to put the tank somewhere where you can run the pipe underground and back up again and surcharge it into the tank, no issues with it. The only difference is that you need at least 200 mils fall between your gutter point here and the tank. Instead of 100 mils, you need a bit of extra head to drive the water into the tank. Plumbing configuration, I won't go into this. This is kind of all the things that kind of go into it, but there are kind of standards, and your plumber should be, aware of this in terms of all the different things that go into it. But this is kind of all the technical components for your plumbing. So there are, it's relatively straightforward. but this is kind of the things that, when we're checking a rainwater tank setup, we check, all of these different components to it. But this is just a nice little cheat sheet to kind of look at and just make sure that, if even after install, you can kind of go around and go, have I got each of these different kind of components, and tick it off with your plumber and just make sure that they're all done. So it's your kind of little way of like checking that it's been installed properly. Pump curves. So this is for those of you who are really, comfortable with kind of engineering almost, kind of you're comfortable with your maths. So again, this is what your plumber should do. You can kind of, I use this for most people. It's kind of like, it's a thing to just know and ask your plumber. Like you sit there going, can I have a look at the pump curve? Even if you don't know what it means, you can ask your plumber to explain the pump curve to you, and you can just nod along and go, yep, okay, at least my plumber's looked at the pump curve. And what this is doing is it's looking at the flow rate into your house and making sure you have enough head. And what this is doing is saying that, okay, you need to supply at least 15 meters of head into your house. If you don't, you won't get good pressure for things like a shower. And so what this means is you can see that this pump here, this SJ3504, it can't supply more than about 40 litres per minute. That pump can only supply 50 litres at 12 meters of head. And so you actually need a bigger pump if you need 50 litres per minute. And this flow rate is tied into how many devices you're plumbing into. So again, very technical, don't need to know this too much, but the main thing is that your pumps do have pump curves, and the pump needs to be able to meet that, needs to be able to meet your flow rate and the head, and your plumber should definitely be looking at this for you, for your pump. Yep, talked about the typical maintenance, talked about keeping your gutters clean. I generally go out, pretty much because I've got a deciduous tree. I go out whenever the tree drops its leaves and just clean all the leaves out of the gutter guards. I generally clean the, like my first flush diverter every couple of months. I just empty it. It takes about, literally 2 minutes. And I do that regularly just to keep it clean. And I desludge the tank. And what I do to desludge the tank is I literally have a tap. I'm just going to jump back a couple of slides. So what I do is on my tank, I have my pump on this side, and I have a lower level installed outlet on this side. So I have 2 outlets. This outlet on this side is connected to nothing. And what I do is it just has a tap. And what I can do is I just open the tap up, like particularly if I know if there's rain coming, I just literally open the tap and it just washes out all this black gunky stuff. And I installed that as low as I could on the tank without causing structural problems to the tank. And then I just literally do that every, depends how much rain we've got, but recently I've been doing that every couple of months. And then what that helps is just keep the sludge down, and you see it, you get all this black gumpy stuff coming out every time I desludge it. So that's a really good setup. And what I do is I actually have a slight fall on my tank so that it falls to that maintenance outlet. And that's why I say it's generally good to have like a slight fall on the tank to your maintenance tank. And I find that really useful just to help keep the tank water nice and clean. There's regulations. The last couple of slides, just around regulations. So you can install a rainwater tank without a DA as long as it meets these conditions. And so if you meet all these conditions, which basically means, it's generally around not putting it in front of your property, not being too close to the property boundaries, not being too tall, and not being very big. So most tanks meet this condition. You don't need a DA. If you don't meet these conditions, you need a DA to be lodged with council. And a couple of things, so that because particularly if you're just doing a simple system where you're just plumbing it in. If you're just doing a simple system where you don't plumb it into anything, like if you just use it for outdoor, you don't need, you don't necessarily need a plumber to do it. You need a licensed electrician for the pump, but anything plumbed internally, where you're connecting, things that generally run off mains or interconnection with the mains, you need a plumber to do it. And that can be, if you're handy yourself, you can do it yourself, and the plumber just checks it all and signs off on it. So it doesn't necessarily the plumber needs to do it, just needs to be signed off by a plumber. And these days it's Fair Trade. They might have changed their name since then, but then Fair Trade is notified of all the interconnections with mains, and then sometimes, depending on it, they may come and inspect the work. Generally not, but sometimes they come and inspect it. If your interconnection, depending on how high risk you are, they might do it. And then if you're really interested, this rainwater tank guide, and this last slide, this rainwater tank design guide is a really good one. It goes into lots of details. You know, if you're really interested in the details of doing it and you're really into that, this is a great handbook of going through in a lot of detail, like things that I've kind of talked about tonight. So yeah, so that's only 15 minutes over. So for those of you who've managed to make it to the end, congratulations. Questions? By all means, chuck them in. As I said, I'm happy to.
Yeah, so yeah, great time to put in any additional questions. We answered quite a few during the course of the your presentation. So what I'll do is I might just, there has been a request to talk about the rebate program we have at Ku-ring-gai Council for rainwater tanks. So now Council has a water smart rebate program that that offers $1,000 for residents to have a rainwater tank installed. So that $1,000 can go to, is split between $500 for a rainwater tank of 3,000 liters or more. And then the remaining $500 is split between 2 connections to the rainwater tank. So as David was discussing, the best water tank is an empty rainwater tank. And the best way of getting an empty rainwater tank is to connect it to your toilet and laundry to maximize your usage of water. So that $500 can go between one connection for 2 connections to from your tank to, say, a laundry or toilet. So if you get or an irrigation system for your garden, and I mean what I mean by an irrigation system, I mean a permanent irrigation system, not a handheld hose. We're talking about a drip line or a sprinkler. So in summary, you can get $500 for a tank of 3,000 liters or larger. Anything smaller, we prorate the rebate. And then to get the remaining $500, you just need 2 connections to the tank. It can be either for laundry, toilet, or a permanent irrigation system. Now, to apply for a rainwater tank rebate, all you need to do is go ahead and install your rainwater tank. And then once it's installed, go to the council's website, go to the community rebates page, and download the application form, fill it in, and send it off to me, and I will contact you about how to complete the process. So it's really that straightforward. We also have other programs. We have a rebate program for bushfire retrofits. So you can take advantage of that. It's not quite water smart, but it's related. It's a rebate program. And we have a whole bunch of other webinars and programs run by the sustainability team here at Ku-ring-gai Council. I myself, I'm running a series of bushfire workshops for residents living in West Wahroonga, I think Pymble, and I think South Turramurra perhaps. Anyway, if you live in those areas, you will be getting a letter in your letterbox. Otherwise, if you want to attend a workshop about bushfire, just go to Council's website and you should be able to find all the ones that are available. It features a 3D bushfire simulator. However, because it's done via webinar, you will only get the 2D version, but RFS will be there, fire and rescue as well. I think there's no other questions coming in through. I think we've done a great job answering them. Also, just to remind everyone, we will be posting a link to the recording of this webinar we'll be posting the recording online on YouTube, but I will be sending it through a link to that recording when it becomes available. Now, it does take a while for these recordings to get processed and put onto YouTube, and it might be done while I'm away on holiday. So if it's not done before I go and leave, I'll do it when I get back. So we're talking about maybe 4 weeks' time, if that is the case. However, I'm sure we can get your slides from David's presentation over to you pretty quickly. So.
Yep, I just sent them to you, James. So
you did?
It should be in your inbox. Done.
Okay. Well, I don't know how I don't know if I can share files. Maybe I can share files. That would be an interesting function on Zoom. Sorry, if this was Teams, I might be able to send files, but not quite sure if this is the case for Zoom. But anyway, I'll do it tomorrow when I'm in the office, and I'll send everyone the slides to the presentation. So if there's no other questions, we could just call it an evening and let everyone enjoy a nice, relaxing Thursday evening with the sound of rain hitting the roof, and that's a potential rain in rainwater tanks. hopefully as well.
Yep. Great.
Okay.
Thanks
cool.
all. Yep.
Thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, go forth and install your rainwater
Yep.
tanks and save all
Yeah.
that lovely rainwater.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
never know, the drought will be back to some stage.
That's right. Yep. I've been on Rainwater for pretty much all this year, so it's
Oh, yeah.
amazing.
I haven't seen the bottom of my rainwater tank. Oh, it's great to. Well, I look actually. You know what? I would actually look forward to emptying my tank.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually,
that's right.
That would
right
be
now.
that would be great. Actually,
it'd be nice.
Yeah, it would be very, very nice.
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Well, everyone have a lovely evening. And yeah, thank you very much, Kate and Anne, for your feedback. That's lovely. I'm glad you enjoyed the workshop. Okay. Well, that's all from us, from David and myself. And please stay safe and enjoy your evening. I'll catch you later.
Good night.
Bye.